welcome back to our NeuroThursday. I think it's number 11. And we want to talk about the cortex, the cortical areas today. And of course, we're going to try to not go through the cortical areas the way like a textbook would go through it, like this is the visual cortex, and this is the posterior parietal cortex, and this is the sensory cortex, and explain what each of them does, because in a way that is true, but also in a way that is false, because the function of a system emerges not through the function of the system itself, but through the connectivity to other systems in the brain or in the body or in the nervous system. So that's what we're going to look at. We want to look at it more from a like connected perspective, and also a systematic perspective, like we would look at it from the perspective of exteroception, interoception, sensory motor, and all these things. So that's how we're going to go through the cortex, to just quickly scan through the brain and get some ideas of what we're dealing with. Okay, so I just want to go back to a basic idea of neurology. So neurological thinking is what is important. That's what I always try to teach my students when we have seminars, which we will have after the summer break. We will start with our seminars again, in live seminars, hopefully. So that's what I tell my students, and that's also what I teach my clients, of course, my patients, because sometimes they don't understand why I would look at their eyes or their vestibular system because of their back pain, but that's something I need to explain to them. So I have to teach them. I have to teach my students, and I have to teach my patients, my clients, what I'm doing and why this is important. So the way to think, and what neurology in the end does, it demystifies things. Like when I was working in the clinic 20 years ago, and we would have a patient with back pain, and back then it was more like a biomechanical perspective, and you have to strengthen your muscles, your back muscles, or your core muscles, or all these things that you're doing. And of course these things are still, or could be true, could be part of a problem, or could be the problem. But of course, if that doesn't work, if that strategy doesn't work, I have to think of something else. And back then it was like, well, if you have a pain in the foot, it could have to do something with your back or with your pelvis. And there was like kind of like, it's already a little bit of voodoo going on there. And then the next voodoo step would be, well, it could have something to do with your glands, with the inside, with the viscera, without ever explaining how that could happen. It was more like, yeah, well, just look at acupuncture. Here's the meridian running down. I say, well, what's the 21st century explanation for the viscera having something to do with pain in the foot? I would like to know that, because I could see that would be possible, but I really want to know why this is possible. So, and next thing is psychosomatics. So psychosomatics is a very urgent issue. We have to be aware of the fact that emotional or mental, not only emotional, mental issues can manifest in the body in terms of muscle spasm, muscle tension, pain. It's a thing called tension myositis, so the inflammation of muscle tissue through chronic tension. But the chronic tension is not caused by a mathematical problem through the proprioceptive system or the vestibular system, but it's caused by permanent body tension coming from mental or emotional parts of the brain. So, and all these things are very explainable through neurology, and that's why I'm always saying, well, everybody needs to know neurology, whether you're working with the feet only, or whether you're working with the eyes only, or whether you're working only with the mind, or you're working only with the guts. Everybody needs to know functional neurology. Maybe not to do the treatment, but to know who would be the best person to treat this patient, because if you have a neurological functional problem and you give them some chemical, even if it's from a plant, that might alleviate the symptoms, but it might not take away the cause, maybe the cause being a structural problem in your skull, putting tension on the vagus nerve, or also a whiplash injury could do that. Putting tension on the vagus nerve altering the function of the vagus nerve, altering the function of the gastrointestinal tract. And of course, if you just give some things to alter the movement of the gut, it will help as long as you take it, but it might not fix the problem because you would have to fix the head or the function of the nerve to alleviate the problem. So functional neurology needs to be in medicine. I just had a discussion, I want to say, with an insurance company because they're saying, well, none of this you're doing is really proven, and so we don't really care about this. And I was just looking at some studies on functional problems in general practice, and it said just for a certain amount of symptoms. So this was just like, I don't know, 10 symptoms: headaches, digestive problems, back pain, stuff like that. So those were considered functional problems, and this study said that up to like 38% of patients coming to your practice would have functional problems. Problem is, in medicine, we didn't have anything telling us how to diagnose and how to treat that. So now somebody's saying, well, we don't see what you're doing there, so we don't want to pay for it. And I say, well, we're talking about neurology, right? So neurology is something that everybody accepts, and we're talking about functional neurology. We're talking about the function of the body being brought by the nervous system, and we're going to be talking about the top part of the nervous system, the cortex, to do that. And if that doesn't work, it could cause the leg not to move correctly, and that could cause maybe hip pain or knee pain or stuff like that. So yes, of course, we will in the future have to kind of go into evidence-based studies, or go into studies to show that how this is working and for what parts of the body and for what kind of symptoms this works best. But I don't think we need to discuss the aspect of neurology at this point, because everything is pointing towards neurology to be the problem of pain, to be the problem of dysfunction. And if you do, yes, you can do a lab, and yes, you can do an x-ray, and if you don't see anything, there's still a dysfunction and there's still pain, well, you should think of a functional problem, which is described in medical literature, and now we're trying to give everybody one way of treating, and this is not the only way, but this is one way of treating. So we're not going to talk about treatment today, we're going to talk about treatment maybe next time. Again, today we're just going to talk about anatomy again. So let's just draw a brain. And I need to find my pens. So I'm going to put these back here, start with the black, and I'm going to draw a big brain. So let's see how big we can draw this here, really big, as big as possible. So we have the temporal lobe here, and of course down here we have the cerebellum, and we have the brain stem. Down here, not of any interest right now. So this is the brain, this is the front part of the brain, this is the front, and this is the back part of the brain. So everybody who has worked with the brain or has looked at some brain literature, and that's where some people already fail, because they say, oh, it's so complicated. Yes and no. It's complex, but it's not complicated, and we just need to, first of all, when we want to start working with it, some basic ideas of what we're dealing with. So let's divide the brain into two parts, front and back. And this part we're talking about right now, the neocortex, it's called sometimes, this part of the brain, and thank you for watching here, just want to say hello. This part of the brain is considered to be the newest part of the brain in terms of evolution. And yes and no, it has developed, but that doesn't mean that this part really came last. It was very, very small in the beginning. It became bigger and bigger. And so the differentiation, neocortex, new brain, old brain being the brain stem and maybe parts of the midbrain areas or the limbic system, which I don't want to call limbic system, but I'll call it that way anyway. So reptile brain, cat brain, ape brain or something like that. Yes, you can do that, but in the end, it's probably not going to be really true. But I understand what we're trying to look at. So what I want to look at is more an interconnected way of looking at this, and the best way for me to look at this is to look through the lens or through the perspective of systems. So first system we have for the brain to detect and work with information coming from the exterior of the body. So exteroception. So I want to start with that. So we have the eye, for example, and of course we have the ear and we have the nose, and we have 3 areas that we want to look at, and this is the visual system in the back of the brain, occipital part, the auditory system here in the temporal lobe, and of course the olfactory system on the inside of the temporal lobe, which is the olfactory system, all connected to the outside of the body. And of course you could argue and say, well, if I touch something with my skin, like if I go to the wall and I feel the wall, that could also be considered exteroception. We're kind of leaving that out because this is more a proprioceptive thing. This is where is it touching my body? It's not touching my leg, it's touching my arm. So it's more defining the body. So let's stick to this. This is the definition of exteroception. Olfactory, auditory, visual. These are really information that are coming from the outside and going into my system. Of course, the olfactory could also have information coming from the inside, like if I've eaten something not that good and I'm kind of like burping all the time and the smell of what I'm burping up is not really good, I get an idea of that what I have just eaten, ingested, might not be so good for my body. Okay, so let's take that away. Sniffing the environment. When I go for a walk with my dog, I usually like to watch him when he sits down and really takes a sniff more than taking a look, because apparently dogs get more information through their olfactory system. We just had a discussion with the people in Germany, with German people, the olfactory system being very important, maybe the most important exteroceptive system. I don't know, the oldest system is not the olfactory system, is the hearing system. In the beginning, that was detection of vibration. So if the floor was vibrating, maybe because there was a big animal coming, that's the oldest sense. That's the lowest part of the brain stem where that is located. And this is like a newer part, very differentiated. We can differentiate 1 million smells. We have 400 receptors. All these receptors have been identified in the nose, and the combination of these different receptors activations can give us the possibility to smell millions of different smells. Probably not as good as a dog or other animals, but still pretty good. So we have sommeliers who sniff on wine and they say, oh, it's got this, and maybe it comes from that part of the country or whatever. So exteroceptive system. And here we start again already with information flow, and that's the more important part. So when we're talking about cortex or that part of the brain, we need to define what are we actually talking about. We have the gray matter, we have the white matter. So the gray matter is only like 0.5 centimeters thick. So that has a couple of layers. We don't want to talk about those layers, but we want to talk about the part that's connecting the different systems. That's the white matter. That's much more. The greater mass of the brain is white matter. And the development of the brain is not having more and more neurons, is having more and more connections. So a brain of a newborn child has more neurons than I do, but I have way more connections between the different areas, connecting them, because that's what the brain is doing. It's processing information to make sense of it and to connect it with other information. So it's a merging of sensory information. It's a merging of visual and auditory information in the ventral stream. So this information is going into the temporal lobe and is being connected with auditory information. So you can see me, hopefully, and you can hear me, hopefully. So this connection is putting together my voice with me moving, my hands, my mouth, of course. And the brain is doing that to make sense. Oh, somebody's talking to me, somebody's giving me some information. So that's what I'm doing. I'm transferring information from my brain into your brain. That's what we're doing through voice, through the movement of air, and through the movement of the tympanic membrane, and then going into the ear, and then being processed again, being thought about, and then maybe talked about to somebody else. So this information can move on and on. So this is where information merges, and in the end it kind of ends up all the way up here. This is like our semantic part of the brain, the frontal pole of the temporal lobe. This is where we store, like this is a pen, a marker, this is a whiteboard, and that's a smartphone, and that's a camera, and all these things. So these things are kind of like in this system, especially up here, because if you have degeneration of this part of the brain, those are the people who are saying, I just can't find the word for that. a table. Okay, so there's the word. Okay, so this is like a very defined part of the brain. When that goes, when that degenerates, finding the right words or connecting the words and the pictures in the brain, it doesn't work that good anymore. This part of the brain talks to that part of the brain here, the frontal pole of the prefrontal or the frontal cortex, and this is where we have our like inner dialogue. So when you sit somewhere and you're thinking internally and you're kind of making up your words, because we kind of think in pictures and words, and this is where we think in words, the connection between the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe right here. So also when I talk to myself, then of course some other systems are also involved, motor systems, but when I talk to myself just internally, like if I would think something now without you hearing it, this would be like an action going on in these parts of the brain being connected. And if the connectivity here is gone or is weakened, it's harder to think in words, hard to find words for objects, hard to think in words. Okay, so here we're making kind of sense of what that is, because somebody told us this is a pen, this is a wall, this is a door, this is a chair, this is a table. So all these things we heard, the sound, voice and speech or a language, that's just sounds. It just sounds connected to objects. So that's what's happening in this part of the brain. So this is, of course, is also associated with memory. The other part of the information flow is going this way. So it's going towards other parts of the brain. And this exteroceptive information is supposed to do something with us. So we're supposed to be able to use it. And one thing, of course, we use it for is movement, because now I have a map of the room, and I know how to move in this room, go towards the camera, or go outside, go into my office, into my practice, or leave the practice and go home. So if I'm thinking about where is my house, oh yeah, you have to go this way, you have to go out, you have to turn left, then you have to turn right, and then you have to turn left, go all the way down, go to the next cross section. So I can make up all these pictures, and that brings me to one point I wanted to make in the beginning, is that a division of the brain into motor and sensory parts. Well, is this now a sensory part of the brain, or is it a motor part? Because if I'm thinking, it's creating images. When I'm thinking about if I would have to describe how to get to my house from my practice, I could describe that to you. In my mind, I'm going through that path. I'm describing where to go, and it's creating images in my head. So that's a motor action of the visual system. And also the connection between the eye through the thalamus to the visual system is weaker than the connection from the visual system to the thalamus to other parts of the brain. So there's more connections going out of the visual system and then going in. So why I'm saying that is because we have to be very careful when we talk about sensory and motor, because are we just talking about like, this is processing sensory information and passing it on, but already the passing on the information is going to create like a motor function of that nerve, because that nerve is creating a signal and passing it on downstream to be processed somewhere else. Okay, so this is the exteroceptive system. That's how we deal with that. So this has to do with perceiving the environment, smelling, hearing, and seeing the environment and processing that to create action. That's what we want to do in the end, okay? And this action is created mostly from the inside, because we have some kind of motivation. We say, well, I'm hungry, I need to find some food, or I'm thirsty, I need to find some water, or I'm tired, I need to find a bed. So that's what we're doing. We're perceiving something on the inside, which brings us to interoception. So interoception, I'm going to take the green, is, when we're talking about the cortex, mainly located in the insula. So the insula is like behind the operculum. So I don't know, is that the right pronunciation? So it's behind that. Just want to show that on my brain. So this part between the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe is when we go into that right here. When we go right into here, this is where we have the insula, of course. That's the insular cortex, and that's the inside of the body. So that's interoception, which is also interesting, I think. The interoceptive cortex is inside the brain. So why is that? Is that just by chance, or is that how the system works? Outside, more outside, inside, more inside? I think that's very interesting. So interoception, more the dorsal part of the insula, the ventral part of the insula already goes into visceral motor system. So this is interoception. So insula is interoception. I'm just going to make it simple right now. So this is where we perceive internal state, the internal state in terms of my energy, my temperature, how I feel, if I'm hungry, if I'm thirsty, all those things are more detected in this area and here on a very conscious level, because of course a lot of that is also going on in the brainstem, where we have the cranial nerve 9 and cranial nerve 10 giving information from the blood vessels and from the gut, and the spinal nerve system bringing information from inside the body, from the glands, from the muscle, from the biochemistry going into the parabrachial nucleus in the pons. So medulla and pons a lot with interoception, but this is of course more like the conscious part, also the part that then drives action. Oh, I feel hungry, I should eat something, because I need to be aware of that. And this is where things start to get a little bit crazy sometimes for people, and that's what we have to be very careful about, saying, well, it's a dysfunction of the insula. Well, we don't know if it really is a dysfunction of the insula. Maybe it's a dysfunction between the insula and some other part of the brain where we need to take action, which would be the orbitofrontal cortex, for example. So the OFC right here is one of the main part of the cortex where I take action, mainly triggered by internal states. So I'm thirsty, I need to go find something to drink, all right? So this is not giving me action. This connected to something else is giving me the action. So that's where we have to be very careful, and that's what I hear all the time, people saying, well, there's dysfunction of this area and dysfunction of this area. I don't know that. I never know if there's a dysfunction unless that person had a trauma or a tumor or an operation or something like that, causing a destruction to that part of the brain. I could say, yes, there is a problem with the structure of that part of the brain. It's not there anymore. It can't have that function anymore. Then, yes, I could definitely say there's a dysfunction in this part of the brain. Otherwise, I always think there could be a dysfunction in that part of the brain talking to another part of the brain. So this is the thing about the connectivity, about the white matter, not the gray matter, the white matter. And from studies with stroke patients, we know that probably white matter damage is more affecting more function than gray matter damage, because there's something that's called neural reuse. So, for example, visual cortex, we use that for seeing. Everybody agrees on that? Yes, but what happens when I close my eyes? What does that part of the brain do now? It's not engaged in vision anymore. So what is it used for then? If I'm doing something with my fingers and I'm trying to figure out what that feels like, and I close my eyes, I'm going to use that part of the brain for using touch or having more proprioception. So this is what the neuroscientist calls neural reuse, which makes things even more confusing. Well, what is it now, visual system? Well, no, it's a brain part computing mainly visual information as long as the eyes are open, yes. And when I close my eyes and I'm visualizing something, yes, that's coming from the visual system also. But if I'm closing my eyes and I'm feeling something, this part of the brain is helping to calculate sensory information. Okay, so neural reuse is a big issue, and also doesn't make things easier when you think about the brain. So we need to be very careful about saying what all these parts of the brain definitely do. Yes, they do that, but maybe not only. And also, if we're talking about, well, if somebody's feeling like his heart beating strongly, we know that there's a stronger activation of the insula, but that doesn't mean that there is a problem with the insula. It could be a problem with the inhibiting systems that should be inhibiting the insula, like the GABA systems, or maybe some other system that's not working, or there's too much glutamate in the brain activating the system so much. So the problem could be from another part of the brain, like the frontal cortex, because I'm paying too much attention to that. That activates that part of the brain more, and then that brain part might look dysfunctional, but it may not be dysfunctional. So all I want to say is that we have to be very careful about saying, well, he's got a problem with his insula, saying, well, that's what it looks like, but it's probably going to be more a connectivity problem. So we're talking about system theory here, and in system theory, there's a saying, or they are saying that the interconnection is the more important part than the single system look. So, exteroception, interoception. So where's proprioception? I need a different pen. Where's my blue pen? My blue pen is right here where it's supposed to be. So that's usually where we will put that sensory cortex. somatosensory cortex. That's where we would put proprioception. Mainly here, body position, that could probably be more here. Right here, this is the biggest proprioceptive ganglion, the cerebellum. So this really is probably more skin level, like where on my body is that. So if I have a mosquito biting me, I should know where it is, so I can hit it or shove it away. So here we already have a problem with, well, what's in between? So there's this big white space right in between. We have the visual and we have the sensory. So it used to be called the associating cortex, or associative cortex. Now it's called more the posterior parietal cortex, which is just an anatomical description of where that cortex is. This is a functional description. This is a functional description. PPC, posterior parietal cortex, would be more an anatomical. But what does it actually do? Well, there's some different terms that are mainly used in psychology, which are saying this exteroceptive part, the visual, is representing, and that's a term that neurobiologists like to use, the representation of the extra-personal space. So that's a space that's beyond my interaction possibilities. So this is extra-personal. No, it's not spelled like this, extra-personal. So, sorry, not readable. So this is peripersonal space. And this is the personal space. Of course, that represents my body, and this represents an area around my body and the part that I can interact with. So if you have a monkey, and that's what usually they do in those science experiments and studies, they have a monkey, they put electrodes in his brain, and they look, when is this area activated? So they have something of interest for the monkey in front of him, and when they have it outside of his reach, so you can only see it, you can see, of course, an activation of the visual system. If they put it within a space where he could reach for it and grab it, then this part of the brain gets activated. If he touches it or it touches him, then the sensory cortex would be activated. Okay, so that's the way we understand it. But there's one interesting part, which is like, and it's probably not really located right here, but there's like a space around the body, and it's a zone. It actually belongs to the peripersonal space. But if you have somebody's arm and he's watching his arm, and you put an object like this close to his arm, this already activates the sensory system. So why does it do that? Because the brain is anticipating touch. So it's already anticipating what part of the body is going to be touched now, so that sensory system is activated before it gets touched. So nervous systems are activated before something happens. That's something very important we need to know, because we can't just say, well, we have to alter the sensory input. We also have to alter the sensory activation, or the activation. And these systems are called efferent sensory systems. We have that for the skin. We have that for vision. Like if I would show you a piece of paper with a whole bunch of colored dots on it, and I would just show it to you and then put it away and then ask you, how many red dots did you see? Most of the people would not be right on the number of red dots they saw. But if I showed you the picture with different colored dots, and I would say, please look at the red dots, even before I show that, and I would say, take or look for red dots, I would activate with that, with saying that, I would activate the neurons that are responsible for detecting red color. So this is what's happening in the brain. The system is activating itself even before a sensory stimulus is there. And that, of course, is not unimportant in the way we treat people. And also that there is no clear, like this is just activating this, and this is activating this. No, when I'm right here, it's activating both. It's activating this part of the brain and this part of the brain. So here's a patient coming to my practice. He had a motorcycle accident. He broke his spine, thoracic spine. I don't know, T5 to T7 or something like that, or even more than that. Incomplete paraplegic, is that how you say it in English? So he could, by the time he came to my practice, he could already walk again pretty good, of course with 2 crutches. The main problem he had is pain in his legs. So he had pain in his legs. And when I asked him exactly where does this pain live, or where is the pain, he said it's about 10 centimeters outside of my body. So Of course, he also kind of mentioned that, that nobody would understand that. And I say, well, yeah, that's clear, because that would be involving more this part of the brain more than this part of the brain. So it's because it's like outside of his body, but it's kind of on the edge, you could say. So I thought about this part of the brain. I think, well, we have to work with this part of the brain, and working with this part of the brain is also doing integration stuff, which I will show at probably next time when we talk about the cortex again with more practical stuff. But then we also did like some training of that area activation to see what will happen to the pain. So because I know that this activation is driven by vision, because if I put this right here and I close my eyes, then my sensory system is not activated with it. It's just really nothing is being activated because I don't see anything. So this is visually driven. So what I did, I just said, hold out your arm and watch your arm. And all I did is I moved my hand around his arm. And this was not some kind of energetic treatment where I would transmit electromagnetic waves to his body or something like that. All I did is this was a visual stimulation of his peripersonal space. And after doing that for about 30, 40, 50 seconds, his pain in the legs started to decrease, because I was just altering the activity in this part of the brain through his arm. And that was also the interesting thing. I didn't know if that would work, but it did work. Activating the peripersonal space around his arm lowered his pain in the legs. So that was quite interesting. He came in maybe with a pain of 6 from 10 with pain medication, and we would bring him down sometimes to 2, sometimes to 0, sometimes to 1. But we continued doing that, and we continued integrating different parts of the brain, of course, spinal cord, peripheral system, etc. And with time, his pain lowered. So in the end, he said he would never go up to a 6 or 7 or something. He would maybe go up to a 1 or 2. That would be like his medium, but he could also go down to 0. And in certain instances, when he was very excited, or when he had to pay more external attention, like he used to be a pilot. So when he got into a plane again with somebody else and he was flying, he was so concentrated, focused on flying, he didn't have any pain at all. So that just shifted activity to other parts of the brain, and then this part of the brain was not interesting anymore. Okay, so this is the proprioceptive system. So proprioceptive system here, of course we have that down here. We talked about the cerebellum already, and of course we have that in other parts, but this is the proprioceptive system. And one part, I don't know exactly where that would be, maybe like somewhere around here, would be a part of the cortex where we would experience vertigo, or we would experience balance, which is also the physiological aspect of it. So training balance is also training the posterior parietal cortex, and there's an interesting book on the peripersonal space. It's from, the name, the author. I will remember, and I think I have it here, but I don't exactly know. Discovering, the spaces between us. No, there it is. Okay, I'm going to grab this book. Need to get on the table. I hope I don't fall. So, this is an interesting book to read. The author is Michael Graziano, The Spaces Between Us. So I would like to recommend this book in terms of being interested in the parietal cortex. It's also about his son having trouble to interact. And interacting with the environment happens here in this part of the brain, especially with the hands reaching and stuff. Interaction with other parts of the world could be showing that there's a problem in this part of the brain connecting to other parts, and they did treatment through balance training, which was interesting. So through balance training, the interaction with other people improved. So you have to be in balance to be interacting with other people, okay? So maybe that's something that's happening here. All right, so going more to the frontal part, or to the frontal cortex, we of course have the motor systems. And like I said, motor systems are also sensory systems because they're receiving information from the visual system, and just motor cortex, premotor cortex, supplementary motor area, I wanted to write SMA, supplementary motor area, something like that. So yes, motor output, 2 different parts, more to the eyes, more to the limbs and things like that, more to the trunk, balance, anticipated postural adaptation, supplementary motor area, premotor cortex, more like calculating how I have to move. Some also say this is the physician, not the physician, the physicist. in the brain, calculating the ball flying through the air and how far I have to go back and where I have to put my hand to catch the ball. So this is anticipated movement. This is the adaptation of posture when I'm moving, when I'm adapting, and this is like moving more my hands and my legs. Very simple, too simple sometimes. One thing I think is very important to know at this point is that motor output from one part of the brain, let's say this part of the brain, does not only go to that part of the body. That's something it says in the textbook. So when I move my hand, yes, this is coming from this side of the brain. And when I move my leg, yes, this is also coming from this part of the brain or from this side of the brain. But what's also coming from this side of the brain is stabilization on that side. This is mostly driven by reflexes in the brainstem. So PMRF in the brainstem is that system when I lift up one leg, the other leg is going to go into stabilization. And of course, this is also driven through what I anticipate. So a lot of this is anticipation, and the output is then generated by other parts of the brain. Of course, this is not causing so much output. This is very distal. So motor cortex goes to more of the distal parts. So this is like 50-50 innervation, motor cortical spinal innervation. The rest is coming from other parts of the brain, and the closer you get to the body, the more it comes from other parts of the brain than from this part of the brain. So how much is the percentage? So if I'm moving my leg right here on the side, how much of my output from this side is going to that side? About 10%, 90% is going to that side. So when I walk, this side of the brain is doing this. So stabilization here and moving my leg here. Now when I put down my foot here, now it switches to that side. Now I'm stabilizing my leg here and I'm moving that side, and that's also done by this part of the brain. So this is not the way we used to think it is, like, just crisscrossing over. No, this is way more complicated. Okay, so this is motor output. Where do we have the visceral motor output? So the output, this is the output to the body, to the movement system. The visceral motor output would be the front part, if we look at cortex, front part of the insula. So we're not talking about other parts. There's other parts like the cingulate cortex, which is on the inside. We're not going to talk about that today. Just going to leave that out. We're just looking from the outside, which is only also, of course, part of what we can see. So this is causing a motor output to the glands, the more anterior part. Of course, the hypothalamus is causing motor output to the glands, and of course, the brainstem is causing also motor output, not only visceral input. So, but if we talk about cortex, this is where the motor output to the glands goes with interoception, then added exteroception, proprioception, then that creates a motor output to the glands, to my heart, to my lungs, the breathing, all that is insula, of course, the input, also proprioceptive, also vestibular system. But as I said, if somebody has a vestibular problem, and you might think, oh, well, it could be this part of the brain, maybe I'll stimulate that, or I activate that, or I integrate this part of the brain. I could alleviate that. It could be the insula, yes. But saying that is always meant, well, the interconnection, the interaction between one part of the nervous system with another part of the nervous system or with a part of the body. So for me, it's always an interaction problem, not a dysfunction at one part, unless I know that this part is somehow has a problem because it's been through a stroke or through an injury, it has been destroyed or partially destroyed. Then I can say, well, we have a problem with the insula because it's not there to work properly. So, but that's also not going to be alleviated just by integrating or doing some training. That, of course, can be alleviated through training, but it takes a lot of time, a long time to do that. Okay, so we have another motor output system, which would be like more the prefrontal cortex. Big part of the brain. That's what at least the neuroscientists say. This is the part that kind of makes us human or makes us what we are. 40%, about 40% of the brain is prefrontal in humans, 8% in chimpanzees, so that is a big difference. This is a part of the brain, and I would say this is a motor part of the brain because this can cause different activities in other parts of the brain. So when I'm saying to myself or when I'm saying to you, just like go inside your foot and just feel what you have under your foot. How does that feel? How do you stand on the floor? Like, do you feel anything? Is there anything like, this is a flat floor, so there's nothing. So if I'm out on a gravel road, I might feel some rocks, or it might be soft because I'm walking on grass or something. So very different information can come through my foot. This is a very hard floor, and I'm wearing these shoes with just very little sole on them. So this part of the brain will then direct this part of the brain to a certain part. And so that's also what we look at when we look at integrated function of the brain. The activation through the frontal cortex or the prefrontal cortex in terms of where does my attention go? Does my attention go outside to what? Oh, to the door, or to the chair, or to the green chair, or the red chair. So this way I can test the activation through the prefrontal system. This can activate sensory system. Okay, what does your knee feel like? What does your foot feel like? So this question is already a functional test. And if somebody says, well, I don't know, this could mean that he cannot process the sensory information, which would mean maybe he's got a problem in his sensors, maybe he's got a problem in his nerve, maybe he's got some problem in his processing the information through the thalamus, or maybe he has a problem activating this part or looking at that part and putting out the other parts. So that's, I'm not sure if that's the right term for it, but surround inhibition is a term used for one part of the brain is activated, the other parts of the brain around it are kind of silenced, and this part of the brain can do that. So when I'm telling you, look for anything red in the room or wherever you're listening right now or sitting right now, look for something red. So just by saying that, this part of the brain is going to activate this part of the brain, probably through what I'm saying. Maybe there's also another pathway, but you can do that by yourself, and that's also part of the process when patients come in. Like, they're always paying attention to that part of the body, and just by paying attention, that's going to activate the system, and that's going to aggravate the symptoms. So putting attention away is sometimes what we do in our practice. So we're not working with the knee that's hurting, we're working with something else to get the attention away from the knee. And not only because this is going to cause some mechanical issues. So I'm working with the foot because the foot has some mechanics that include or involve the knee, and then that would involve the hip. So if I work with the foot, yes, I know that. That's important to look at, but we could do that as a strategy just to take the attention away from that part, because we know that then we deactivate that part of the brain. So the prefrontal cortex, oh, my knee is always activating this part of the sensory system, and it's like turning up the stereo, you know, and at some point it's just too loud, it just doesn't feel right anymore, but this can happen within the brain. So this is part perception, the attention, the relocation of attention is part of the process. And also part of the functions we test. Is that patient able to focus on that part and to defocus away from that part? So that's part of the process we're looking at when we're talking about prefrontal cortex. So what I like to say, this is like the mental systems, or part of the mental system. I don't like to call this the emotional system. I think when we talk about emotion, that's only one part of like more mental issues. When we talk about the mind-body connection, yes, that's why mind, mental. I could just have pain because I'm stressed out, not because I feel emotionally overwhelmed, but I just feel it's just too much. So that could stress me, that could cause tension in my muscles through some pathways going down, maybe through my hypothalamus, and that would maybe cause a myositis, something that some people call tension myositis, just because I'm so tense because I always think of something that I think is so important, and maybe it's not important, or maybe it's too important to me, or make it too important, whatever that is, and that could cause then a problem in the musculature. So of course, mental issues very helpful to look at, and we need to test that functionally. So first thing I always say to my patients is that if we're talking about mental issues, it's not like psychology. We're not going into psychology like what was your childhood like and how do you interact with the people around you. First of all, it's brain mechanics. Okay, so brain mechanics is how can I sense this? How can I put my attention here? Am I able to put my attention outside of myself? Am I always looking here, and how do I feel? How does it feel? How does the knee feel when I do this? How does it feel when I do this? How does it feel when I do this? this is going to amplify everything I sense in my knee. And if there's maybe a little problem because maybe my knee has had an injury and maybe it's not going to be okay again in the future mechanically, always looking for something will alter the sensation. So I haven't found any numbers on how much I can amplify through my prefrontal cortex, mainly probably, how much I can amplify sensory information, but we do know there's these efferent sensory systems altering all kinds of sensations in the body, on the inside, in the motor system or the parietal system, but also visual, auditory, of course. You know the what's called the cocktail party effect, when you hear something that could be of interest and then all of a sudden you understand every word in that part because your brain is able to amplify that and turn down all the other parts that are around you just by giving that part the space more neurons to calculate with, so you have a higher resolution. And it's amplifying. So the eye has the possibility or the capability to alter sensitivity by a factor of 10,000. So, wow, 10,000. If that happens also to the sensory systems, I would feel pain 10,000 times more than if I would not pay attention to it, which could mean if I pay attention to it, I feel pain. If I don't pay attention to it, I don't feel pain, which happens to a lot of patients. They're saying, well, once, I'm playing tennis and I'm into the game, I don't feel anything. But afterwards, when I'm like sitting down, then I feel it. Is that really because it hurts afterwards and doesn't hurt while he's moving because movement makes his pain better? That could be, but it could also be that he's paying attention to something else and that way he does not feel his pain. So that could be a strategy to learn to alter attention, which would be something which would probably happen through the prefrontal cortex system. So, yes, this was a short, not too short. I have talked for 50 minutes almost, yes. So a short overview of cortical systems, connectivity. We're going to talk about networks. So that's what this is about. It's about connection. It's about interaction of different systems from the front to the back. I'm going to put some arrows in here from the front to the back, and from the back to the front, and from the top to the bottom, and from the bottom to the top. So it's all, in our view, first of all, about interaction. That's why we call it neurofunctional integration. By the way, if you haven't heard, we have the whole seminar. So that's all the 18 tutorial videos and the manuals, about 70 pages of instructions how to use basic techniques in neurofunctional integration. We have all of that on our YouTube channel. So you can just go to the YouTube channel, 18 videos, you can look at that. It's about 3 hours of watching, and the manual is in the description of video one. There's a link, you can download the manual, and you can look at seminar number 1 just on your own. It's for free. And yes, we're going to have a live seminar soon, I hope in English, maybe this year already. So if you're interested, stay tuned, and maybe I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching.